Okay, there we go. We're on. Loud and clear, sounds like. Yes. Well, can anybody tell us where we are? What's been happening? We're in Genesis. Okay. Well, I do. More or less. I think it'd be good since y'all were not more specific than Genesis to review the story here. 29, and over we've got Jacob had to run away, and he went to his kinsman Laban, and he's wandering there, gets to the well, sees Rachel, love at first sight, kisses her before he even introduces himself. And then when Laban heard the news about his sister's son Jacob, he ran to meet him and embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his house. And Jacob told Laban all these things, and Laban said to him, "Surely you are my bone and my flesh." And he stayed with him a month. And then after that month, we pick up at 15, then Laban said to Jacob, "Because you are my kinsman, you should therefore serve me, or should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what shall your wages be?" Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were lovely. Some say weak, all kinds of different interpretations. But anyway, Rachel was graceful and beautiful. Now, some translations say shapely instead of graceful and beautiful, which means, anyway, if we were going to grade her on a number scale, she would be a 10, I guess. But anyway, and Jacob loved Rachel, immediately loves her. So he said, "I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter Rachel." And Laban said, "It is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to any other man. Stay with me." And we know Laban's thinking, I can get free labor for the long haul out of this guy easier than I can anybody else. So, that's an interpretation. Anyway, so Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of the love he had for her. And anyway, then Jacob said to Laban, so 7 years have flown by, "Give me my wife that I may go into her, for my time is completed." So Laban gathered together all the people of the place and made a feast. But in the evening he took his daughter Leah and brought her to Jacob. And Jacob went into her. Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah to be her maid. And when morning came, it was Leah. And Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me?" And then Laban says, "This is not done in our country, giving the younger before the firstborn. Complete the week of this one, and we will give you the other also in return for serving me yet another 7 years. Jacob did so and completed her week, meaning Leah's week. And then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel as wife. And then Laban also gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel to be her maid. So Jacob went in to Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. And he served Laban for another 7 years. Now, that's where I'd cut off reading the story before. Now, here's picking up on more detail. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, and some translations say hated, and in that hated, unloved, if we think love, hate as contrast, loved, unloved, contrast, it would be easy to transpose unloved or hated in interchangeable usage there. But anyway, hate seems more strong than just simply unloved. But anyway, when the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Leah conceived and bore a son and named him Reuben, for she said, because the Lord has looked on my affliction, surely now my husband will love me. She conceived again and bore a son and said, because the Lord has heard that I am hated, he has given me this son also. And she named him Simeon. And again she conceived and bore a son and said, now this time my husband will be joined to me, because I have borne him 3 sons. Therefore he was named Levi. Now we don't have in this one who did the naming. It just says he was named. So the namer is ambiguous here. She conceived again and bore a son and said, this time I will praise the Lord. Therefore she named him Judah. And then she ceased bearing. Then we go on with the story. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister, and she said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. And Jacob became very angry with Rachel and said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Then she said, here is my maid Bilhah. Go in to her, that she may bear upon my knees, and that I too may have children through her. Now we remember this same wording and concept with Sarah and Hagar. So she gave him her maid Bilhah as wife. Now this is kind of curious, not as concubine, but as wife. I mean, full relationship of wife. So now he's got 3 if she gives her as wife. And Jacob went into her, and Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me and has also heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she named him Dan. Now Rachel's maid Bilhah conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. So she named him Naphtali. When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her maid Zilpah and gave her to Jacob as wife. Now we got 4. Then Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a son, and Leah said, good fortune. So she named Leah's maid, so she named him Gad. Leah's maid Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, happy am I, for the women will call me happy. So she named him Asher. In the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben went and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. And then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? Now, mandrakes, we're not sure exactly what they are or what they're supposed to do, but some say it's kind of like a fertility potion or some kind of attraction or whatever. But anyway, you fix them and they have some magical powers. Anyway, then he may lie with you, Rachel said, then he may lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes. And when Jacob came from the field in the evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, you must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. So he lay with her that night, and God heeded Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a 5th son. Things happened really fast. Anyway, Leah said, God has given me my hire, because I gave my maid to my husband, so she named him Issachar. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a 6th son. And then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good dowry. Now my husband will honor me, because I have borne him 6 sons. So she named him Zebulun. Afterwards she bore a daughter, and named her Dinah. Then God remembered Rachel. And God heeded her and opened her womb. She conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. And she named him Joseph, saying, May the Lord add to me another son. So she's not happy with this one. She wants another son. Anyway, we will stop there because we've got lots of intrigue going on here. So in order to get at the family dynamics of all of this, because this seems to be quite the soap opera here going on, Rosenblatt in her writings, and she's a part of the book Wrestling with Angels. Remember, she's a psychologist, and she's looking at family and relational dynamics, and she asks, why is Jacob so susceptible to Laban's ploy? Now, we stop and remember, he's been with this guy for 7 years. Didn't he notice in any other dealings that he was not trustworthy? He was underhanded. But then when he comes to the wedding, Rosenblatt asks, is Jacob accepting this? And he's kind of punishing himself for deceiving his own father, Isaac. Because, he goes and he complains, but then that's the end of his complaining. He just accepts status quo. Anyway, but she answers that we see in the story how easily we can be handicapped by emotional neediness. So she's reading into the character of Jacob, a deep emotional neediness. She says, Jacob is not so much blinded by his love of Rachel as he is blinded by his need of love. Jacob is hungry for the approval of his surrogate father because his own father Isaac hadn't given him approval. So here he's hoping and wanting approval from the surrogate father that he has found in his uncle. So he's so hungry he can't see that Laban does not really care for him. Laban only wants to manipulate him to serve his own advantage, and which ends up being 14 years of free labor, basically. Now, this desperate need for recognition, for love, for success, can make us, Rosenblatt says, make us human beings today manipulated by crafty, unscrupulous people who are good at recognizing and taking advantage of someone's neediness. Now, extreme case is the child molesters. When they're watching kids, they can see the ones that are left alone, the ones that do not have a whole lot of self-confidence and inner strength, and they can prey upon them, just give them a little attention because they're hungering for attention, for someone to care about them, and they become very susceptible to manipulation. And in other situations, there are others that end up, looking for approval in the workplace and showing that, they're a good worker and they want to be affirmed. Then all of a sudden they're taking on more and more and more work that should be evenly divided, and so it's easily manipulated and taken advantage of. Well, Rosenblatt suggests that Jacob does not stick up for himself over the great deception and the broken confidence because he doesn't feel entitled to fair treatment. He had 2 strikes against him. First of all those years of rejection by his dad, just, not interested in you, gave him a sense of unworthiness, feeling less than. And so that conditioned him to feel unworthy. And then add to that his own guilt when his mother, Rebecca, manipulates him into this deception and claiming the birthright and the blessing. So Rosenblatt suggests that Jacob accepts Laban's deal as penance for his own sin against his father and his brother. Now, when I was serving out in Montana, do y'all know I used to work out in Montana? Well, I took an intern year from seminary. Union did not require internships like Perkins does. It's just a part of the MDiv Master of Divinity program. But I thought it might be a good idea, and there was a position in Fairfield, Montana. The pastor there was going on a sabbatical to earn a D-Min, and so he needed a year away. So anyway, got connected. But when I first got out there, a lot of stories about that, but the main one here was when I was out there, I learned of a young man, and he came in and counseled with me for a short time. A tragic thing had happened to him. His brother was getting married, and it was shortly before the wedding. It was the week before the wedding when all the, stuff is going on, the parties and whatnot. He was driving who was going to be his sister-in-law, the bride, from Fairfield to Great Falls to do some shopping or fitting her for a dress or whatever. There was an accident and she died. He had injured his wrist in the accident, and it was something that surgery could repair. But because of his guilt, he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't get it fixed. He wanted to carry this as his penance or his sign of his guilt that he felt inside for what had happened. It wasn't his fault. I mean, he wasn't driving drunk or anything. It was just a freak accident that happened. And all those years ago, I can't remember if I knew the details or not, but if I did, I've forgotten them. But I do remember the sadness and the tragedy that he just refused to get that fixed. And so he had this inoperable wrist. It wouldn't move. It was frozen. And the danger is, the longer you let it go, the more permanent it becomes, because nerves and such will atrophy and you just can't fix it. Anyway, so there are cases where people will take on things because they feel guilty and they feel like they deserve to be punished, and then will look at things that happen as, well, I'm guilty, and so God is giving me this punishment. I deserve this bad stuff. So anyway, Rosenblatt is reading that into Jacob as his way of not fighting back, but accepting this extra 7 years as doing more penance. She does point out that as we look at Jacob this way, we see a virtue in him, and that is his ability to delay immediate gratification of his desires for future happiness. I mean, he does. He's got that virtue. He takes on this initial 7 years to wait for his happy day. And then another 7 years before he can, be completely free. The problem is that complete happiness and fulfillment never do actually come to him. His life is full of conflict and struggle and turmoil and sad things just continue to come to him. But she adds to this analysis that when we look at that, we see in him patience and perseverance as some qualities that he has, patience and perseverance. So we kind of miss that in the intrigue of the stories. She also adds this analysis that psychic wounds suffered in childhood affect our adult self-image and behavior. The psychic wounds of childhood do not go away. They go with us into adulthood. And she suggests that until we repair the damage done to our self-image in childhood, we are extremely vulnerable to future humiliation and failure because of that. Now, there's a psychologist, John Bradshaw, that this reminded me of his work, and he's developed a whole system for counseling and approach to dealing with that very problem. He uses the concept of the inner child, the wounded child, the inner child, and his book, Homecoming, Reclaiming and Championing Your Inner Child, deals with this. Let's see, he has another book, the Family and Healing the Shame That Binds You, that some of that wounded child is a deep sense of shame that is the psychic wound that we carry with us. But anyway, his point, Bradshaw's point, is in his book that nobody else can do that for us. When we are an adult and we're carrying this wounded child, even though our parents or earlier conditions and people in our lives may have caused the wound, they're not the ones who can fix it. We can be mad at them, we can be angry at them, we can hate them, but they're still not going to heal or fix the wound. It's up to us as an adult to take care of that inner child. Now, we can't do it on our own. It's helpful to get some counseling to identify exactly what happened and how it's affected us, and then how we're processing that in our life as an adult. But in doing that, going back, there are ways to reprogram our reaction and our way of dealing with the triggers that happen that put us back there and react as the wounded child instead of as an adult in relationships. You may have encountered people who just seem to have a chip on their shoulder, or who are extremely sensitive and defensive and reactive to things that, the rest of us just don't even notice, but they seem to be hypersensitive and easily hurt and wounded in everyday situations. Well, in most likelihood, they've got a wounded inner child who is still hurting and is continually being re-injured because that inner child hadn't learned to heal and then overcome whatever that happens to be. But anyway, it takes hard work and a time. But if your wounded child is always acting out in your adult relationships, then it would be very helpful to take care of that and help that wounded child rest easy, and then let the adult person be in charge of your life in the present. But anyway, it takes some time. But back to Jacob, and his story illustrates this wounded child theory in psychology, and his problems illustrate how the unresolved and unhealed psychic wounds can tend to keep us in that vulnerable way of relating and continue to get re-inflicted with wounds in our adult relationships. Rosenblatt goes on to discuss Rachel and Leah's struggle. She takes the issue of how little control we have over the forces that shape our lives. We have no control over what genes we have when we're born. We have no control over who our parents are going to be. We have no control over the time in history in which we're born. We have no control over what country we're born in. We have no control over our birth order, whether we're the oldest or the youngest in our lives. And it makes a big difference in our lives, our birth order. I remember counseling with a couple. Heal. Stop. There. Anyway, it was, I'd just been reading some stuff on birth order, and it was coincidental this couple had come in, and they were having trouble. And so I asked about the birth order, and it ended up that she was the oldest in her family. She was the oldest child, and she had been having to be, as oldest child with several kids, a lot of surrogate mother roles, helping out, and he was the youngest in his family. He was the baby of the family, and their biggest problem was his voice. She's always ordering me around and telling me what to do. And and her part was, he won't do anything. He just sits around and waits for me to pick up after him and take care of things and be the responsible one. He won't grow up. And it was quite interesting. They had carried their family of origin roles into their relationship and just continued to habitually play out those roles. It came natural. I mean, it was it was a perfect fit. However, neither one was happy with the dynamic of that relationship, but it had just felt so natural to fall into it, and they were just on cruise control, acting that way. But it was not, they were not happy or fulfilling. Anyway, Jacob's story does illustrate these things, but Rachel and Leah's struggle is illustrating how unfair life can be, and the blessings and advantages that often go to some who didn't do anything to deserve them, and the troubles and the curses and misfortune that happened to fall on others, that they did nothing to deserve all of that. It's just the way things happen, and life is not fair. So she says that we have to recognize that. But in the story of Rachel and Leah, we do see how this plays out. One sister is given the genetic makeup that turns her out to be shapely and beautiful. What did she do to deserve that? Well, just luck of the draw. And the other, not so. Now, as I was reading the commentaries, some would say Leah was homely. It doesn't say she's homely. She just isn't as strikingly beautiful as Rachel is. Now, we know some people, if really know how to maximize their gifts. I mean, there's certain ways that you can wear your hair and dress and all of that really make you look extra special. And then there's ways that you can do it all wrong and that are unflattering. Isn't that what? and it just, all of the special ways of the cut of dresses and such that are either flattering or unflattering, that some will just do it all wrong. And then, these magic makeovers, when somebody who has an eye for that can change everything, and all of a sudden it looks like an entirely different person just by the different hairdo and makeup and the way the dress and so forth. So it may have been that problem between them is that they weren't that terribly different. It just one focused on her outward appearance and the other didn't. But anyway, we don't know if she were homely or disfigured, or or what. It doesn't really say one way or another. But Leah suffers terribly as the undesired wife. Rachel, on the other hand, suffers the cultural stigma of being barren. That's such a big thing in that culture. Leah's envying Rachel for being the object of Jacob's love and affection, and Rachel envies Leah's fertility and ability to give Jacob sons. And with each new son, Leah hopes for acceptance. We hear that in the text. She's hoping that this child, now he'll love me, now he'll accept me, and it doesn't happen. But Rachel has, in a sense, salt rubbed into her woundedness of being barren. Every time Leah has another baby, it makes her feel less fulfilled. And then when Rachel finally conceives and bears a son, she names him Joseph, which means, may the Lord add another son for me. She's not satisfied. She's still hungering for that sense of completeness. And she's still competing with Leah. And then we think back, Rachel must have suffered a great indignity at her wedding celebration, spoiled by her father's greed and craftiness. Now, if we stop and think, now, if she's the beautiful one, she's always gotten all the attention, and, Leah's kind of in the background, and Rachel gets all the attention. So it just seems to me that for 7 years, she's been planning to have this big wedding and celebration. Now, my wife tells me that a young girl's wedding day is very special. And, she's the princess, and she's dressed in her dress, and all eyes are on her. The way the ceremony goes, the focus is on the bride. She's right there in the middle. And, the attendants are out to the side. And, this is going to be her day. Although at that time it wasn't such a big ceremony. But anyway, for 7 years she's been waiting and hoping for this. And I thought of an analogy. It's kind of like maybe like someone winning the Miss America contest. The big finale, she's crowned, and then all of a sudden it's stripped away because someone says you weren't eligible. You were 1 month too old. Or someone leaks some nudie pictures from back in high school or something, and oh, great scandal and shame, you can't be Miss America. We give it to first runner-up. And, right there, expecting, all the glory and wonder and fame, and all of a sudden it's robbed from you. Well, Rachel, being the pretty one and having all of that experience and attention, must have felt devastated that she was robbed of her moment of this big, being the center of attention and the great celebration. And then, not only that taken away, she had to share her husband with her sister, and then later share him with the handmaids. So anyway, it's a big hurt and tragedy for Rachel. Rosenblatt makes note that even though polygamy is acceptable in the patriarchal times, and she points out there are inherent problems with meeting the emotional needs of all these participants, and therefore it's an illustration of why monogamy is the best path. It would be better, a much better arrangement, because, and she's pointing out the flaws of the polygamous relationship, and then making the jump to today with affairs and whatnot, that the inability to develop the deep trust and emotional intimacy with one, if you're having sexual intimacy with many, and the break in the time together, those special times where one can grow closer and develop that deep intimacy emotionally, if times are shared with a bunch of others when you're not present together, can be such a great distraction and take away from the development of this fulfilling relationship. So anyway, she makes that point. Dana Fuel, a female theologian who and biblical scholar, does quite a bit of compare and contrast of Rachel and Leah as well, and her turn of the phrase and concept are so good. I'm not going to try to paraphrase her. It's so much better, I think, just letting her speak for herself. But anyway, the apex of the Jacob story is sandwiched between the conflicts with Esau on the one hand and twice with Laban, and then this conflict between Rachel and Leah. She says that commentators have seen a literary parallel between Rachel and Leah and Jacob and Esau. The two sisters match the two brothers. The issue of who is firstborn is again crucial. Favoritism creates a problem. Rachel, in stealing her father's teraphim, or the gods that we'll deal with later, has even been described as a female Jacob stealing the family blessing. The stories are, in many aspects, mirrors. But while the conflicts involving Jacob and Esau and Jacob and Laban center upon the issue of dominance, who will become the great patriarch, Rachel and Leah have their own problems to work out. They, through a cruel ruse of the patriarchy, indeed as a result of Jacob and Laban's struggle for dominance, have been pitted against each other in a denial of their separate lives. Now, nobody has really brought that up, but that they are forced together to stay together and they're not given the freedom to go their separate ways from the childhood home and find their own life and happiness. They are locked together forever. And she says, a good laugh among men around the campfire at the expense of the duped new son-in-law loses its humor when considered from the woman's point of view. Rachel must share her husband who loves her. Leah, forever the outsider, must endure the resentment of both husband and sister. Now they're bound together in this marriage to Jacob. I mean, they're not just bound to a husband, but they're bound together in this situation. The women are like two prisoners that are chained together. Ever seen these movies where two prisoners are chained together and they escape? But it's really hard to get away because they're stuck to each other. Anyway, it creates some funny things in those kind of movies, but it's an image that these two are chained together. Neither is able to escape the other. Used by their father to procure Jacob's labor, they are allowed no right to speak, no right to choose their own mate or their own future. They both live wedded to Jacob and therefore to each other in an unholy matrimony, and using W-H-O-L-L-Y rather than H-O-L-Y. The problem for Rachel and Leah is indeed one of unholiness. Neither is allowed to be whole persons. Now, Rosenblatt made that same point, but I didn't read her commentary because I knew it was here and stated better. From the beginning, they're introduced only as parts, as though neither were complete in herself. You know, one is lovely, speaking of how one looks upon her, but then the Leah, who has the tender eyes from a point of view how she looks at the world and how she perceives, seemingly more sensitive, more caring, more compassionate. If one is raised where everybody's, giving you the attention, then you may not develop that sensitivity and care for others so much as being more self-centered, which may be the point here. The two parts. Anyway, the insinuation is that each woman possesses something the other does not. Rachel has her beauty of form and face. By implication, Leah is not so stunning. Leah, on the other hand, has tender eyes, affective, responsive eyes. In contrast, there seems to be nothing noteworthy about Rachel's eyes. Leah looks, Rachel is looked at. One woman, on account of the way men look at her, inspires love. Indeed, from the moment he sees her, Jacob loves Rachel. But the other woman, on account of the way she looks at others, may actually be more capable of returning love. Once married, they become characters of the roles assigned to married women. Rachel is the wife, the lover, the one desired by her husband. Leah is the mother, the other, and fertile to a fault. It seems they each want to be the other. Rachel may have her husband's love, but what she really wants is children. "Give me children or I shall die," she demands of Jacob. In desperation, she, like Sarah before, uses a handmaid to acquire offspring. And she struggles to see in these children signs of justice and victory. Leah, on the other hand, has plenty of children, sons in fact, who should secure her place of honor. What Leah wants, however, is her husband's love. With every son born, she hopes for Jacob's love. "Surely now my husband will love me. Surely now my husband will be joined to me. Surely now my husband will honor me." She, like Rachel, is caught in a vain attempt to change her life, even to the point of bargaining with Rachel for Jacob's sexual attention. She trades Rachel's mandrakes and she points out a fertility drug, for a night of love with Jacob. But instead of finding a place as wife and lover, her role as mother is reinscribed. She conceives and bears more sons. Rachel, in the short run, makes better progress. She eventually conceives and bears a son, Joseph. She sees in his birth her restoration to wholeness. "God has taken away my reproach," she says, yet at the same time recognizes that one son is not enough to satisfy her need to be a mother. "May Yahweh add to me another son." Like Leah's comments in naming her sons, Rachel's speech at the naming of Joseph betrays her wishful thinking rather than her confidence in her status or her future. It may indeed be her mothering interests that motivate her to steal her father's household gods. We'll get to that later. Anyway, drop down. Rachel's prayer for another son is answered toward the end of Jacob's story in a cruel twist of her earlier demand of Jacob, "Give me children or I shall die." She had said, "Am I in place of God?" And he answered, en route to the land, to the promised land, her children and death are once linked. She dies, giving birth to another son named Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, but Jacob, unwilling to be reminded of her suffering, names the child Benjamin. And here lies the poignant trap of the patriarchal motherhood. Women face social death without children and physical death to bear children. Remember the death of children and women dying in birth was a high percentage, 25 to 30%. So the risks and sorrows, the ambiguities and the ironies are all but passed over in the rush to tell a man's story. Jacob's story is the main storyline. But while Jacob struggles with the beings both divine and human, and yet he prevails, Rachel and Leah merely struggle with each other. While Jacob confronts God face to face, Rachel and Leah can only confront each other. Which is more profound a struggle? Rachel says, "Struggles of God, I have struggled with my sister, and I have prevailed." Indeed, God has been there, opening and closing wombs, taking the side of the oppressed, but at the same time sanctioning their oppression. In other words, God seems to just kind of let it go and let this situation continue to be in the culture, but doesn't seem to be doing anything to change that at this time. Just as Jacob declares to Esau, "Seeing your face is like seeing the face of God," so soon after his turbulent encounter with the face of God, we must wonder, is there much difference between struggling with God and struggling with one's sister? Well, Rachel and Leah, Jacob and Esau, struggling against God, struggling against each other, struggling against the system that constrains and forces competition. Has Rachel prevailed as she has claimed? Does anyone prevail in a system that pits brother against brother, sister against sister, a system blithely sanctioned alternatively by God's silence and God's arbitrary participation? The God of good and evil, who both blesses and cripples Jacob, who blesses and curses these women, on the one hand granting them renown as the two women who together build up the house of Israel, but on the other forever marring their hopes of life and love with fragmentation, alienation, and even death. The problems surrounding wives and mothers in the patriarchal family naturally carry over to daughters who live in and learn the system, the cultural definition of who they, as women, should become. This is their subjugation or subjection. Anyway, that's... Yes. Irony.
Ancestry of Aaron and King David, not Rachel.
Right. Oh, yeah. The way it comes down, but we do have, and Levi, the priestly order, and Moses and Miriam, all are Leah's children who play such an important part, and Judah, who is birthing the kings. However, for Rachel, she does produce Joseph, and without Joseph being down there in Egypt playing that critical role, he doesn't father people who become leaders later, but he's in that very significant place. So each has a significant role later on, but the way it works out, it's such a mess. It's such a mess, and we can take two theological ways of interpreting this. One would be that it is God is in complete control, and that God willed each one of these things to happen, and that it's God's will that the bad things happen, and therefore just accept it and be satisfied. And that's a little bit of what Dana Fuel is saying, is a lot of interpretation is that what is there is what's supposed to be, and it's God's will, and what we're supposed to learn from that is to just accept the way things are and go along, to get along. Another way of looking at that is that with human freedom and freedom of choice, and the fact that when we start off as little babies and grow in a world that is not perfect, as Rosenblatt pointed out, the wounds in childhood, the psychic wounds that we carry with us into adulthood, often create problems for us, and we don't make the best choices, and we don't react the best ways, then given all of that, what human freedom does with our own choices, but when we inflict bad choices on others, and then that affects their choosing ways they choose, then we can say that if we don't want to just be puppets and we're going to want human freedom, then we have to understand that God, in trying to guide this process, has to work with immature, fallible human beings. And God does the best God can with such messed up material. I don't know, the thought just popped into my head that sometimes artists want to create perfect works of art, but sometimes they get inferior material. I was thinking of wood. Sometimes you've got wood that's you're working with, and then you think get a nice piece of furniture and you made it and it's really great, and then that wood dries out and cracks and it's ruined, and you wanted this to be your masterpiece and it cracks and it's split. Well, God probably felt the same way. I had this all planned out just right, and then the material I'm working with messed it up, broke it, and so I had to start all over again. Anyway, now Jonathan Sacks has some commentary about this as well, about all of these births, but we haven't got time to go into his, and that was going to be a good conclusion, so we'll have to conclude with this, with just the fact that I think that the theological interpretation that I had secondly is how things are. I don't think God is the puppet master, and that we can take from these stories, and some who want to say, well, just if you just have faith and you read your Bible, then do what the Bible says and everything will be just fine in this world. Well, we've got these stories where, oh my gosh, it's such a mess. What we have to learn from is not follow the examples of the people in the Bible, but learn from their mistakes and to see their weaknesses and their fallacies. And the message then is that God still loves them and cares for them in the midst of their struggles, and God tries to work with them to make the best of some of these bad situations, even when it's been their fault and they've done bad things. God continues to love and care and try to turn things around and tries to make the best of these bad situations that often we create in our midst. And gosh, have we got a bunch of them in the world today, a bunch of bad situations. I'll give you all a heads up for not next Sunday. We'll kind of try to wrap up some of this about Jacob and Rachel and Leah and Laban and all of that. I don't know if we can get through all of it because there's quite a bit of intrigue. But our church is going to do a special emphasis of studying John Wesley and the history of Methodism. We will stay with Genesis, but it won't be Genesis of the Bible. It'll be Genesis of Methodism, how we got started. And all the other classes are joining together and focusing on Adam Hamilton, a really dynamic minister of Church of the Resurrection up in Kansas City area, who's really doing wonderful things, and he's written a book to be a guide for renewal, and it's Revival is the name of it, and so David thinks that it'd be maybe a good thing for the whole Sunday school, youth through our oldest adult classes, to take a month and study together this heritage that we have, and maybe learn some things about how we can get some revitalization. If revival, we'll talk about it when I begin. First Sunday be the 7th. So we have one more lesson, and then we switch to that. So I'm not going to ask you to buy the book and read it unless you want to. There will be some available, but I will try to cull from it the best that I can, and I've got a whole library on Wesley, and if I need to look up some extra things, I'll do that. And so we'll have the Genesis of Methodism for a month, and then we'll get back to our Bible study. I'm under orders. Take thou authority as part of the ordination and preach the word and teach from house to house and all those things. So let us pray. Well, dear God, we come into your presence when we wake up each morning and realize we're still alive and that we need to be living the good life and following your guidance and direction. So help us in this process. And as we come to church, we try to get more guidance and direction for how to live our lives according to your will. So help us be open and be able to take the lessons and truths that you